Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you an episode review of the iconic The Haunting Hour television show. This episode comes from season 1. It was directed by Peter DeLuise and it was written by Neal Shusterman. And the episode in question is Catching Cold. I have here my sealed volume 3 from the legal North American release of The Haunting Hour television show. It's sad that they only ever released 6 volumes, but nonetheless, on volume 3 on the back, it features Catching Cold. So I'll be using this as a point of reference for the video. Now, Catching Cold was actually the very first Haunting Hour episode I ever watched back in the day when the show first aired, I think around 2010, 2011. And this episode got me hooked. And it made me obsessed with watching the whole series. I mentioned in the past, I more so started watching the show religiously around seasons 2 and 3. Like, I would watch them as they aired. But I got into it a little bit late into season 1, and I might have caught a re-airing of this episode. But I have to say, after re-watching it many times over the years, and even recently for this review, this episode really does hold up as one of the classics from this television show. I've seen many people put it in the top 10, even the top 5 of the show, and I have to agree. It's one of my personal favorites, and it might be one of my all-time favorite kids' horror stories ever put to pen and paper or adapted to screen. Especially if we're talking episodes, this is up there in discussion for me for one of the best kids' horror episodes, in my opinion. That might not be the same for everyone. I know some people have problems with this specific episode, but I really don't. And I know I'm getting way ahead of myself, but I think this is a fantastic story. Now, also, what draws me to this is that if you don't know anything about The Haunting Hour, majority of the show was actually written for it. So The Haunting Hour itself is based on a 2-book series that R.L. Stine did in the late 90s and early 2000s that were pretty much a duology of sorts. You had The Nightmare Hour and The Haunting Hour. Now, granted, stories from those short story collections were adapted into the show. Not a lot of people know that there was 2 episodes in particular that were pulled from other authors of different things. This one in particular was written by Neal Shusterman. And Neal Shusterman actually wrote Catching Cold for the volume 3 of Darkness Creeping, which I recently reviewed on the channel. And that's why I own this in my collection. This features the story that was turned into this episode. And if you want another one to sink your teeth into, essentially, there's a series called Strange Matter out there, which is like a Goosebumps knockoff or like a Spooksville meets Goosebumps type of thing. And there's a story in there called Creature Features that was turned pretty much in name only into the episode, into season 2 of The Haunting Hour. So The Haunting Hour does have its fair share of adaptations, and Catching Cold is one of them. So if you love this episode, go check out the short story. Go pick it up, or maybe check it out online and read it. You might be shocked. I'm going to do a short story versus episode right after this video, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, off the bat, if you haven't seen Catching Cold, this is one of those episodes that kind of defined, in my opinion, what The Haunting Hour was. It was a show with unorthodox ideas that more so plays on the Twilight Zone type of storytelling with, its style that it had going for it. It was more about existential horror, more so than outright monster stuff. But the show was also a catch-all, kind of like its predecessor, Are You Afraid of the Dark? And this episode kind of shows what this show was able to improve on from Are You Afraid of the Dark? Getting away from the 90s monster stuff or the weird, kooky family stuff. And they actually took some kookier ideas that you would see back in the day and took it a little more serious and took it a little more dark more often than not. And that's why The Haunting Hour has such a street cred. And this episode, I think, helps fuel that. So, yeah, go check this out if you haven't seen it before. With that out the way, let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away about Catching Cold. So Catching Cold is about a boy named Marty. One day, he's laying in his bed. I guess he's feeling a little bit lazy. His mom's asking what he's doing with his day. He has nothing planned because the kid is kind of, he's not really outgoing. He doesn't have much friends. but he doesn't like to do much. He's just that type of person. And he hears a ice cream truck outside come by, and this strikes his interest to want to go get ice cream because I guess he's bored. And he looks for money. He can't find any. His mom is doing yoga. His dad, who's a police officer, comes home and puts his wallet down. He ends up finding $1 though, without, giving into temptation to look into his dad's wallet, and tries to chase down the ice cream truck. And this really upsets Marty, and he goes to talk to his friend Ari. And Ari, while they're talking about the ice cream truck, didn't mention hearing anything of an ice cream truck the day before. And while they're having this conversation, the mailman is nearby, and the mailman, hears a certain name of the ice cream truck, Creamy Cold, which sparks a memory. And the mailman shares a story about this little kid that he knew when he was growing up named Jimmy Jeffries. And little Jimmy Jeffries, he was kind of like how Marty is in the present, where he's talking about an ice cream truck that nobody else hears or anything, and he became obsessed with it. And supposedly he disappeared right after he started hearing the truck. So Marty, instead of taking this story seriously, he's like, well, maybe he ended up catching the truck and maybe he's forever chasing it. And as the story goes along, Marty is then tempted late at night one night by the Creamy Cold ice cream truck, which is the name of the ice cream truck in the story. As it pulls into his driveway, it awakens him, and Marty opens the front door, and there's an ice cream cone waiting for him to essentially eat. And Marty eats the ice cream cone, and he immediately falls in love with the ice cream and wants more. But the ice cream truck leaves him. And for the remainder of the story, Marty's starting to exhibit obsession behavior. He's also showing signs of addiction. He'll be laying in his bed, and then there's a certain jingle. I think it's Pop Goes the Weasel. That's the jingle of the truck. He'll be hearing faucets making the same song in the same pitch and all of that. It's starting to get into his mind a little bit. He has a math book where he's just constantly writing Creamy Cold. He's talking to his friend Ari, and his friend Ari's like, what is your obsession with this ice cream? And he's like, it's like the food of the gods. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't eat ice cream. You don't know what good food is, blah, blah, blah. And pretty much tells his friend off. And you start to see Marty looking more disheveled, like an addict would, essentially. And then it culminates into a part of the story where Marty, looking disheveled, he interacts with his dad when he's out on duty one day, and his dad brings him a bike with a helmet and says, hey, look, I got this for you to be more active and you can, play outside more. And Marty's more focused on this tire puncture strip that's in the back of the back of his police car. And he gets this idea that maybe this is going to be the way that he's going to be able to stop the ice cream truck. And to tie into that, there's this conversation he had before with Ari, where he came to this realization where he believes that Creamy Cold is kind of like a fable you have to believe in order for it to come to you. But Marty has come to the idea that in order to get it, you have to either be given it or you have to catch it. So Marty's now going to use the tire strip puncture thing to stop the ice cream truck. And that may or may not play into the climax of the story, and we get to see if Marty actually does stop this ice cream truck. And let's just say it plays into the ending where Marty finds himself inside the ice cream truck, tempted with the ice cream again. But there's a revelation to a story we heard early on in the beginning, and we get to see Marty kind of unravel at the grisly realization that he's found himself into. So that in a nutshell is Catching Cold. So Catching Cold, off the bat, I want to say this. I haven't mentioned the actor, but Robert Capron, he was a series regular in the Haunting Hour TV show. He starred in another one of my personal favorite episodes from the show called The Cast. He does a fantastic job playing this character here. Now, Marty is not the type of character that I usually gravitate towards. in kids horror. He's kind of annoying. He's kind of selfish. But one thing I like about Marty in this story is that he is kind of street smart. And unfortunately for him, he finds himself wrapped up in things that are kind of out of his mind a little bit. You know, he doesn't kind of understand the gravity of the situation, which I think does help the story, especially if you're looking at it from an adult lens. The story is one huge allegory for drug addiction. And I think it plays very well in Marty. You know, he wasn't necessarily a bad kid, he was just kind of lazy. But then he found himself becoming less lazy over the wrong things. And that's the unfortunate side effect of what the ice cream brought to him and all of that. So I do think that the story really does fare well for Marty's character in that way. And I've already mentioned the allegory itself. I love thematic kids' horror stories, especially when it's able to be terrifying, engrossing, and enthralling. And this is like the perfect package of a thematic kids' horror story that I've ever seen. At least one of them. It's just something that knows what it's trying to do and knows what it's trying to be. And if you don't know this about the short story, in case you haven't read it, this addiction stuff really isn't played up in the short story. So this is more of an added thing. I think Shusterman added on to it. Maybe he saw more potential with the idea. And I'm glad that he added on to the source material. Even though he didn't really need to, that added element that was missing there really does show here. Some more positives I can have is how creepy the story unfolds. The whole thing with Marty being traumatized by the Pop Goes the Weasel jingle is a really creepy thing. I haven't seen something similar to that ever, other than this episode here. Being haunted by the sound of the jingle was really well executed, and I have to give Peter DeLuise some props there for that. And I don't know, the look of the ice cream truck with the 3-layered ice cream. You have vanilla, strawberry, and then chocolate on the bottom, and the face on it. It looks just like a normal ice cream truck at first, but as the story goes along and you see more of this truck, you see its face. In my opinion, it starts to look like it knows what it's doing a little bit. And that's a little added touch that I really appreciate too. And while the episode itself takes place in the same generic neighborhood that I think most, if not all, of the Haunting Hour episodes take place in, at least the ones that take place in the neighborhood, it does look a little bit dreary. I guess the time of year or whenever they decided to film, it looks kind of rainy outside and very gloomy. Which is a stark contrast to its short story counterpart, which was, primarily set in the summer around 4th of July. So having that, dark and dreary atmosphere going for it does kind of help unsettle you with it. And then, some more positives with it. I do think that the jingle they used, I guess the octave of the jingle, Pop Goes the Weasel, it was like purposefully low. And you hear it throughout the whole episode, and it kind of works in that Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, happy, happy Halloween type of way, where as it goes along, it gets more and more disturbing. And I don't know if that's a callback to Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, but it really worked here. And the acting, for the most part, the parents were kind of stock, even Marty's sister was stock, Ari was stock, but the show stealer, Robert Capron, I've already mentioned how I loved his performance as Marty here and Marty's character, but this is pretty much a unique character story. And the fact that he was able to carry the narrative on his back that way is super impressive. And the execution of the idea, there's plenty of setup and payoff. There's really no loose ends, minus a few things if you really wanted to be harsh on it. But yeah, this episode is pretty much like a perfect package. Now, if I had any things to point out about it, that I do think that this version does it a little bit better than the short story counterpart, but it's still kind of here, is the fact of maybe the pace can be a little too fast and how Marty comes to these conclusions. You can look at it like, the plot willed Marty to kind of understand the cat and mouse game this ice cream truck is playing with him. I can see that because of the pace, and I'm not trying to fault 21-minute episodes all that much, especially when you have a show basing pretty much all of its adaptations mostly on short story material. You're trying to stretch something as short as 10 to 13 pages to 21 minutes. But the thing is that can be a detriment, and I can see why some people have an issue with it. But to me, at least Marty has an understanding of what it is. And that also plays into another thing I could critique about it, which is the lack of explanation of what this ice cream truck is. In both versions of like the short story and the episode, I don't like to compare this that much to its short story counterpart, but I guess I have to for this because it's a similar issue. There is no real backstory on the truck itself, but the Jimmy Jeffries urban legend is still there, and it still offers that layer to it. And I think how the episode improves it, and the reason why I'm willing to forgive both of these little critiques I could have about it, is the fact that in the episode version, there's this element of the ice cream truck kind of being like a holiday figure, like a Santa Claus or an Easter Bunny, where if you believe in it, it comes to you, right? So this is more of like a supernatural entity that only appears to a select few people, as opposed to its short story counterpart where a bunch of kids see the ice cream truck and can never catch it. So there's a catch-all with that, but I think adding that kind of helped this episode here and the logic hurdles that could be had with it, which kind of cancel out my critiques with it. Honestly, I have no real issues with this, other than maybe the atmosphere of the short story could be added in here. Maybe there could have been a summertime 4th of July element put in here if they had a bigger budget. This one, in terms of adaptation, I can kind of see the issues with the budget there and not being able to faithfully adapt it as much as possible. It looked kind of generic, at least for Haunting Hour setting standards. Atmosphere could have been a little better, but it still worked fine. But yeah, putting aside, the evident budget things, I think they made something really memorable and special here, especially for this show, which has a lot of high quality stories and episodes to peel through. Catching Cold really is one of those pillar episodes of the entire series, in my opinion. It's this one, maybe Really You, or The Return of Lily D, kind of in a co-spot. Then you have Pumpkinhead, the Pumpkinhead 2 episode arc, and then you have the Dead Body 2 episode arc. If you want to include a fifth one, in my opinion, I think Mascot would be up there as well. But those are probably the most recognizable ones. Maybe Fear Never Knocks, Dreamcatcher, Creature Feature is another one. But when you have a story this good that provides legitimacy for the product or an IP, you have to give it some praise. And I've always loved this episode. I've never waned on my love for it like something like a Mascot or something where, that one's just kind of bogged down by some silly stuff. But this isn't really all that silly. It's unorthodox, it's weird for sure, but it is told and played in a serious way. And it really works in that regard. And I quite love it. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, I'm willing to give Catching Cold here a 5 out of 5 stars. It's not going to be that high for everyone, but this is honestly one of the handful of Haunting Hour episodes I find to be genuinely perfect. I would change nothing about it. Maybe tweak some things that I like better in the short story, but it's still serviceable and it still works fine enough. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Catching Cold's episode. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this episode before in the Haunting Hour TV show. Do you love it? Do you hate it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.